Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Welcome to this episode of the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. I'm normally your host, David Wheatley, but this time I'm going to be handing some of that duty over to my colleague, Jim Marshall. This is one of our first Friday episodes, and the first Friday of every month, we do a 1-hour Zoom work session, usually at noon Eastern time. And apart from July and August, I think we skipped those 2 months. But the rest of the year, you can join us for free. Sign up at humanergy.com. This session was the January 2025 session. And our series in the beginning of 2025 is going to be talking about our backpack. And that's an analogy we use at Humanergy for the weight of things we carry around with us and we're responsible for. It feels like it can be heavy sometimes and overloaded. And in particular, if I'm in a role transition, it can feel like I'm carrying 2 backpacks. And that's what Jim's here to talk to you about. So take it away, Jim.
Managing capacity, managing your backpack is challenging always. And it doesn't matter if you're transitioning roles or like Jessa, it looks to me like you're carrying arguably 2 backpacks, though the role you had and the role that you're covering. And I think many of us feel that way throughout I guess I would say in reflecting on my time, in the world of work, I have often, almost always felt like I had more to do than time to do it. And the people that I have led or supervised, the people that I have worked with closely as colleagues, the people that I've coached or consulted with as a humanergist, it seems like that's true. I've never met anyone saying, well, maybe that's not quite true. There are some times when people have, less to do than time to do it, but it's not very often. And in most cases, those people are looking for more to have impact. And I think that's true because organizations are trying to be as lean as they can. They're, the ways that business has gone up and down in cycles over the last 20 years, it means that organizations try to do more with less people than what they've done it before. So I think that's what leads us to this place where capacity management and backpack management is so critical. If you would, I'm going to share my screen really quick. So give me a moment. Hopefully that looks right to you. Good. I wanted to start here with this backpack picture because it really Mimi explained what we're talking about when we use the backpack. I remember years ago, I worked for Humanergy from 2008 to 2014. And I worked in industry for about 10 years with a couple of different companies. And then I'm back to Humanergy as of January 1, 2024. We used to use the idea of the bucket. And I always appreciated the statement that capacity is capacity. In other words, a 5-pound bucket fits 5 pounds. It doesn't fit 5.5 pounds. It only fits 5 pounds of, whatever you want to say, sand or water or whatever it is. And along the way, what we found was helpful is to switch the metaphor to a backpack. That all of us are metaphorically carrying a backpack on our shoulders. And the one helpful part of that metaphor is it can feel kind of heavy to carry the backpack of responsibilities that I have. And then, what we put ourselves into that backpack, what we feel like the organization, our boss, our direct reports, the people around us, whatever, there are lots of stakeholders who end up creating a sense of obligation for us, or a sense of there's some load that they put into our backpack for us. So sometimes our backpacks feel, this is actually one of our humanergist, David Wheatley's wife, Londa, in the picture on your left with the gigantic green backpack. So sometimes our backpack feels like that. It's just unwieldy and impossible to carry. Sometimes our backpack feels like the one on the right, where it's like there's no end to the hanging on of more and more things on our backpack. The only other thing that I wanted to say in introduction is this. I don't know if you have experienced, but I have experienced that the psychology of in other words, what I think I can manage versus what I can actually manage, those are sometimes different. And I need to pay attention to, am I feeling daunted by task number one? And therefore, I think it's going to take me a long time. I don't want to go and do it. And I avoid doing it. So I actually lose some of my capacity just through the way that I think about that task. And the best example I can think of is I had a house project at one point where I had laid grout tiles and the glue for the grout, or sorry, I'd laid tiles and the glue for the tiles had seeped up. And I needed to go in and kind of like chisel out all these little bits of glue that had been, and it took me a year to decide to spend a Saturday and go and do that work. And I finally decided, okay, I'm just gonna spend, from 9 a.m. to noon, I'm just gonna at least start on this project and get a start on it. And if I don't get as far, because I thought it was gonna be just hours and hours of being on my hands and knees with a little screwdriver and a hammer and tink, tink, tinking, all this stuff. What the lesson I learned that I'll never forget is by the time I got started, within an hour and a half or 2 hours, I was done. And I thought this was going to take me days or, I just had this outsized, and I know that's not such a work related project, but the it became this thing, the tiles and the glue between the tiles, it became this lesson for me around there's times when I have a big project that I don't want to do, or I'm daunted by, or I'm afraid it won't go well, or whatever there is, mentally that's making it a bigger project and it prevents me from getting started. And so sometimes it's helpful just to dive in and get started on that. One of the next things that I want to do in less in talking about backpack management in general and more in talking about role transition is share with you this slide that we've been using with clients for some time now that walks through what role transition looks like when we're working in organizations. And I would say I want to spend a little time talking about what role transition looks like when we transition roles staying in the same company, and then a little bit of time when we transition roles moving to a new company. And some of our comments, like what you said, Steve, it's like when I'm moving to a new company, I don't always know what I need to know, or I don't always know if what I want to suggest is going to land. Well, those are some of the challenges of a new company. You don't know what you don't know, but there's particular and peculiar challenges to staying in the same company as well. And this slide tends to illustrate it pretty well. It's like when I move to a new role, there's some part of my time and capacity that I spend on the new job or on the job that I just took. And then there's some part of my time and capacity that I spend on my old job. And I don't know about you, but that can be a gray and murky discussion for a lot of people. And I can think of my own experiences in transitioning like that. And I can think of supporting people who've transitioned like that. So one of the things that I think it's helpful to think about is I've got a couple of tips that I'll share with you, and then we'll come back to this. When I thought, well, what would I share with people if I were thinking about transitioning? What would I think is most helpful? So the first one that came to my mind was big ears, little mouth. That's a phrase that I heard around the Humanergy team years and years ago now, but sometimes people say you've got two ears and one mouth, so maybe you should double the amount of times you're listening versus talking. That kind of idea. It's just that idea that when I'm making a transition, I want to ask a lot of questions. And I think that's true whether you're going in the same company and it's especially true when you're going into a new company. And one of my thoughts was, create your list of powerful questions. If you spent any time around the Humanergy team, you probably heard some of us talking about asking powerful questions as a real leadership skill and as a thing to value, being able to ask those powerful questions. And I thought, okay, well, when I transitioned into a new role, whether it was in the same company or in a new company, what were some of the key questions that I asked? And just off the top of my head, I came up with what's going well and what's holding us back. And that's a wonderful that, I just want to gather as much information as I can about the perspective of the people that I'm going to work most closely with in this new role. I really like, and I've heard a lot of leaders who like the question, how can I help you? And it's just a broad question that says, I have a service mindset. I want to do what I can to make you successful because probably, hopefully, most of us believe if I'm helping you to be successful, then I'm helping myself and all of us to be successful. It's kind of that greater good, we're all in this together mindset. And then the others that I thought, especially if you're sitting in any kind of a leadership role, it's what do you enjoy about your job and what's the one thing you would change? And I actually like those two questions in that order. I don't know if you've ever experienced people who tend to have a negative orientation or an orientation to what's wrong, but I find that what do you enjoy about your job can be a pretty disarming question. It expects them to have some answer about what they enjoy. So especially a negative person kind of reframes reality and asks them to think about it in a different way. And then I've always really enjoyed the what's the one thing dot 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 question. And in this case, what's the one thing about your job that you would change? And it's not like in that conversation with an individual, I'm limited to just one thing. But what the one thing question does is I find it naturally takes people and gets them to cut away all the lesser important things and zero in on that most important thing. And so, what's the one thing about your job that you would change helps to really get after, if I have 10 direct reports and I asked all 10, well, what's the one thing? And there's some level of consensus there, then that helps me to start to zero in on, well, what's really important here? The other thing that I'd say, especially thinking about that last slide, where the old job's always trying to kind of keep some hooks in me or keep some carabiners stuck to my backpack, it's negotiate with precision. And by precision, I mean who, what, by when. And who, what, by when is like the key three words in planning any action. What I find for myself and in meetings that I'm in or in organizations where I'm working with people, we're always talking about what do we need to get done today, or who's going to, what's the solution to the problem that we're going to solve, and sometimes who is a natural component. The thing that I think is most often left out is by when. So I remember when I was in a senior HR role, I was helping to make decisions about role transitions frequently. And so the leader who was we'll say, Joe is leaving leader number one, and Joe is going to leader number two in the same organization. Leader number one is saying, oh, I can't lose Joe for 6 months. Like, I need Joe. He's got to do this thing for me. And leader number two is like, I need Joe yesterday. Like, this role's been open for however long it's been open, and I need them. And so it was always this negotiation between two leaders about how long is this person doing those duties. And what I felt like was, one, we should remind ourselves that Joe could have given 2 weeks notice and just left the organization. So, in some ways, it's not like we have to do only 2 weeks of transition from one role to another. But if we had to, we could. In fact, if we had to, we would find a way to transition if we only had 2 weeks notice with this person leaving. And so I think that sometimes helps the leader who's losing a person to a new role to think about, well, what's realistic? And then if you're thinking about whether it's 2 weeks or a month or 2 months, then I think it's about drilling in with some precision. What projects are most important for Joe to keep? How long? What is the deliverable? What do we think is a realistic deadline? When would we plan to transition this no matter what? And then that third tip is planning for impact. And impact in the Humanergy world is like, it's an achievement or it's an orientation toward what am I trying to achieve? Or what is the destination? Or where do I want to end up? It's not about how do I start from where I am and just do the work, just plow through. It's about how do I get myself, at least mentally, out into the future to the place where I have finished this thing, whatever it is, or to the place, sometimes in a role transition, it's like, let me transport myself a year into the future to my performance review. I want my leader to be saying, Jim, you killed it. You did great work. I'm really grateful for your contribution. And here are a couple of the highlights. So I want to put myself in that moment and think about if I've had a real impact this year in this role, then what would I have achieved? What would I have accomplished? How would I know that? How would my, team and direct reports, and how would my peers and how would my boss or bosses, how would they know that I had really made a difference and had an impact? And that's one of those keys. So again, that's thinking about how do I get, if I negotiate with precision, I'm taking that time in the new role and I'm getting established in my role as quickly as I can. I'm letting go of those key obligations, those projects. I'm bringing them to closure. Also, there's probably some level of delegation. I'll show you a slide in a minute that I think is really helpful in thinking about capacity management and role transition. And then obviously today's conversation is less about getting ready for the next role, but it is true that as I spend time in my current role, that I get pretty good at doing that. And I find that I can do the tasks and the job in less than 100% of my full capacity. And that gives me some room to ask, well, what's next? And what can I do that my current boss is doing? Or what can I do that would be a stretch assignment? In what ways can I grow and start to prepare for the future?
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanergy.com for many more resources.